Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, what makes a book good? So this is one of those perennial questions that goes round and probably a question I spend quite a lot of my time thinking about, particularly when I'm making review videos and things like that. But there's a book I read recently that really made me reflect on this and made me think about things in a slightly different way. So I wanted to talk about that experience today. But before I do that, let me just describe what I mean by a good book. What I'm not talking about here is great works of literature. This channel is not and has never been about great works of literature. It's about books for fun. It's about entertaining books. It's about enjoyable reading. So I don't mean, when I say what makes a book good, what makes a book that is going to, last for centuries, what makes a book that will be, hailed as a milestone in the history of literature. I'm not talking about that kind of thing at all. What I'm talking about is what makes a book that's enjoyable for the reader who is reading it to read. And that experience is going to be different for everybody. Everybody has different things that they like and dislike in books. Everybody takes a different personal history to every book that they read, so they're going to experience that book differently. So when I talk here about what makes for a good book, I'm talking from my own personal experience. But as I say, there's one thing that's happened recently that's really made me reflect on this. So let's talk briefly about some of the things that you might consider to be the things that make a good book. So things like, and again, let's just say by good, I mean a book that will be enjoyable for you as a reader. So what are some of the things that would make you pick a particular book over others and make you enjoy that book more than others? So I think genre is definitely one. And the history of popular fiction is really all about genre fiction. To the extent that when you talk about literature, books that are considered to be literature seem somehow magically to exist outside of genres, even when they, use some of the themes and tropes and things like that of those genres. I am a huge fan of horror fiction, of crime fiction. I sometimes enjoy science fiction. I sometimes enjoy romantic fiction. Genre fiction for me is a huge pleasure, as I'm sure it is for many of you watching this. And knowing what genre a book is going to be really helps you understand how likely you are to enjoy it. For example, I know I'm more likely to enjoy a crime book than a fantasy book. I just know that before I even open the first page of the book. I have a higher success rate with crime books than I do with fantasy books. So genre is definitely important. I think setting can be important as well. So, and by setting I mean both time and place, and also is it in a fantastical setting? You might be someone who really enjoys reading about books set on other worlds, in imagined places. You might be someone who really enjoys historical fiction. You might be someone who really enjoys reading books that are set in other countries. So I think setting is another really important thing. And then those two things, kind of genre and setting, kind of set the tone for a book, really, don't they? And then after that, you get into some of the more nitty gritty stuff. So things like the storyline, the plot, the characters, the dialogue, things where the setting and genre of a book may well steer it in a certain direction, but after that, it's down to the individual author to tell their story in the way that they want it to. So so I think setting and genre are the building blocks, and then after that the author can go wild. So another and to speak about authors, I think the other thing that is really important is who is the author. If you know that the book is by an author who you've read before and really enjoyed, it's more likely to be a good book for you. You're more likely to pick it up. You're more likely to enjoy it. And I've certainly got, authors who have consistently, throughout my reading life, been reliable authors for me. Authors who I almost always enjoy. People like, the two big ones, I guess, for me are Stephen King and Edmund Bain. So let me get into the book that made me reflect on this again. And that book is this one, Extreme Caution by Jean Brashear. I did make a very short video a while ago where I talked about this. And so this book is a category romance. So it's a romantic book. It's set in the world of NASCAR racing. So the setting is a setting which is kind of intriguing, but not necessarily one I have any particular interest in. I don't think I've ever watched a NASCAR race. I certainly don't follow it as a sport. I'm not really into sport at all, and not into motorsport. So, NASCAR is not something that appeals to me. But I can see how it could be an interesting setting for a book because, there's a lot going on. There's the excitement of the races. There's, all the stuff going on in the background, like the strategizing between the teams and things like that. And that does, does play a part in this book to an extent. And then you've got the genre. So the genre is category romance. So not just romance generally, but category romance, which is, a particular kind of romantic fiction that's kind of tends to be written to a formula. So going into a category romance pretty much what you're going to get. You're going to get a happy ending, for example. That the couple are going to end up together. So I knew those two things going into this book. I knew the setting, so I knew it was going to be set in the US. I knew it was set in the world of NASCAR, and I knew it was category romance. And those are things that aren't, necessarily high on my list of reasons to pick up a book, but I could see the appeal of all of them. I'm starting to read more category romance fiction, have been over the last year or so. But the thing that really got me about this book was the characters. And the thing that's unusual for me about the characters is that the two characters, the romantic couple, are both in their 50s. So I'm in my 50s. Yeah, I know it's hard to believe, but I'm in my 50s. So it was interesting for me to read a book where the central characters were a couple in their 50s. I wasn't used to reading that. Most of the category romance I've read, and to be honest with you, most of the romance I've read is probably category romance. Most of the romance I've read has been with, where the couple are a lot younger, in their 20s or, at the most 30s. So it was interesting for me to read a book with a different type of couple in it. And I don't want to say I felt seen, because that sounds a bit ridiculous and pretentious, but it really made me reflect on the fact that I wasn't used to reading books with 50-year-old couples in. And it made me reflect on the importance of representation in books. So that is something I haven't talked about in this video yet, but actually when you think about things like setting and characters, representation is part of that. If you are someone who has grown up in a particular part of the world, or a particular city, or a particular environment, and you've never read a book set in that environment, that city, or whatever, then reading a book that is set there will be more interesting to you. And I certainly found that with this book. So I enjoyed this book more than I would have if the couple had been in their 30s. I think if the couple had been in their 30s, I would have thought this was an entertaining read. Because the couple were in their 50s, it spoke to me in a way that other category romance books that I've read haven't. And as someone who is overrepresented in books, so, I'm a straight white male, many of the books I've read, I've talked about Ed McBain and Stephen King, two straight white male authors whose books tend to feature straight white males. So I am someone who throughout my entire life has read have read books that are about people like me. And so I don't even think about it. It's not even a consideration for me, because I know that most of the books I pick up will feature, I will be represented in as a straight white man. But for many people, that won't be the case. Many people are not overrepresented in books. And I think people tend to get a bit sniffy sometimes when people like me start talking about representation in books. And certainly that short video I made, I got a lot of comments on that video, and in particular on TikTok, from people saying representation doesn't matter. What matters is it a good book? But for me, the key thing is that representation, so thinking about individual readers, as an individual reader, you are more likely, I think, to think a book is a good book if you're represented in it than if you're not represented in it. And that doesn't mean that just because a book has characters from a certain group in it, that makes it an excellent book. It makes it a work of literature that everyone is going to enjoy. But what I think it does mean that people from that same group are more likely to enjoy that book than if it didn't have those characters in it. And that's certainly my experience with this book. So I know this can be a contentious subject. Do let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.